Wonderful. So we're at part 2 of our first episode on AI and accessibility. We're going to leave our guests introduce themselves in a second, but we're going to try and bring a new angle, hopefully, on what the community is thinking around accessibility and AI. I'm going to try and not over gesticulate if I can, but I can't say anything else. I probably will. And we're going to try and see if there are any gaps or things the community can do to address the needs that arise from the technological advancements of AI and the accessibility needs that pressure all our colleges. So I'm going to start with Stevie. Would you mind introducing yourself, Stevie? And then we're going to go around to Leanne as well.
Of course. Thank you, Tibby. So I'm Stevie Emanuel, Head of Technology Enhanced Learning at Cardiff and Vale College.
Lovely.
And I'm Leanne Howe, Teaching, Learning and Professional Development Manager at Gower College, Swansea.
Lovely. I'm Tibby. I'm a professional coffee maker for the college. And I thought it would be best to start with how the community meeting went. So for those that are watching us now, where we're meeting past where the Wales AI community has just met a couple of days ago, and we're really trying to bring together the threads around where the discussion has gone. We've heard some lovely information from JISC and from Charlotte, from our colleague from Cardiff and Vale, around a case study around how accessibility needs are being addressed. But it would be interesting to try and get your feel around how that community meeting went and what were the main takeaways, I would say. Do you have like 2 or 3 takeaways of things that you would say were across the board came from everyone in the meeting?
Yeah, so I think just to start off, Leanne had a brilliant concept for the 3 sessions. This was the first of the 3, about the gap. So the first session was Mind the Gap, and hopefully we've identified a few things that people want to work on with AI accessibility in the sector, problems that occur in, how can we help and support that? And the next session will be about bridging that gap and looking at, what we can do to support that, if I've explained that right, Leanne?
Yeah.
So a few topics for discussion that come out was there was a lot of consistency with tools being used, I thought,
Definitely.
within AI accessibility. But the realisation with these tools that they were linked to accessibility.
Yes.
So there was a lot of people who didn't understand really what accessibility meant and that they were meeting their own needs by using these tools, but they just used them because they helped them do something in a better way and a way that suited them. But I think that penny really dropped in the community and we had a lot of proactive discussion, didn't we, Leanne?
No, it was actually quite heartening, I think, because in that space, I think a lot of people came not knowing what it was going to be about, what do you mean by accessibility? And you could almost see this like a moment of going, oh, that's what it is. Oh, yeah, that's what it is. Oh, yeah, I do that. But also understanding why we have to do it. And this is why the Mind the Gap bit was so important. And I think one of the takeaways for me was we were able to really recognise where the gaps are. We focus a lot with Mind the Gap on ND learners, ALN. But what also came out was types of learning and learners as well, talking about apprentices, that's accessibility and inclusion, talking about ESOL learners, that's part of it as well. Yeah. So I think it really opens up the whole discussion around digital accessibility and what it means actually for an inclusive curriculum, not just for an IDP or an ALN learner, I think. Yeah. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think one of the core concepts that come out from it was the fear of knowledge. That was one of them. And as Leanne just said, that parity with digital deprivation. So a lot of people are using these tools but haven't got access in other situations. So how do we prepare our learners and teach them how to deal with a task that they're working on and scaffold them in an appropriate way if they can't then use it when they go into industry? And I think with AI, it's not a new concept, but it is new to a lot of organisations. And the fear that's coming from that, people are retracting.
Yes.
So we've got employers who won't engage at all with AI, but are learners using something that's really effective in a college environment.
Very interesting.
And I think for us, learning from learners, isn't it? They are far more ahead of this journey than we are in how to support themselves.
That's right.
They're harnessing the internet.
Social media these days is full of tips and tricks around this AI tool, that AI tool. And I think I understand why a lot of people would be scared about that. Just the sheer magnitude of it, I think would be enough to scare you. But to bring it to like a more broader question there is, why should we even talk about AI and accessibility together? Where's the goal in that? Do we even need to talk about it, or do we just rely on the accessibility tools or practices we already had?
Where do you want to go? I'm going to follow up on something you said before I came into that. A takeaway that came out of that was overwhelm, fatigue, tool fatigue actually came out. So we'll come back to that as well in a minute. The reason we have to talk about AI and accessibility, and it's something we touched on in a previous episode, is because AI is about a proactive approach to accessibility. The tools and the functionality are there, your immersive readers and some of those aspects, and they're there. And we have to do so much more around that. But the proactivity for learners who maybe are neurodivergent, for example, to break down tasks, a tool that came out was Goblin Tools, right? And we referred to it in the chat with Laura and Charlotte earlier. But the proactivity to break down an overwhelming task, for example, that's a proactive approach. That's an AI tool. But that's not just good for an ALN learner or an ND learner. That's good for us. It's good for staff. It's good for any learner. So that's why I think we have to talk about AI, because I think it allows us to be proactive with our accessibility approach, is not reactive. That's my thing anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's the word accessible, how accessible all of this is. AI has brought us so far in the future, isn't it? When we spoke about accessibility even 5 years ago, people would completely steer back and think, I've got a class of, say, 15 learners, 15 to 20 learners, all with different needs. How do I meet those needs? You've got read and write on a computer. That's very limited, isn't it? And that's the extent. I'll give different colour paper. You know, we're at a place now where AI within seconds can turn something into something completely different that's going to suit someone's needs. You know, turning something from text to audio.
Yes.
That would have took a long time previously, and teachers haven't got the time to do that.
And I think what it does is it promotes this gap analogy, because I genuinely do think of it like that. It allows us to think about our education system's not built for the barriers that we've got to accommodate. Yes. What AI will do is allow us to flag up those boundaries. It's more than just a different colour paper. It's more than just a font.
Yes.
By using AI tools and this proactive approach, we're teaching our staff to consider, oh, that's a challenge, that's an adjustment, that's an approach. So it becomes a teaching process as well, because it is about giving this parity of experience and trying to remove these barriers to learning that our system is actually set up to just create and put them in place, because it really is. And I think it flags up to people, that's what an adjustment really is. It's not just about putting it in a size 14 font, though that is important.
Yeah, but it's personalised, isn't it? And there was a brilliant example that was used in one of the breakout rooms my group I was in. There was a member of staff who lives by, he said, Notebook LM to change text to podcast for him. It's more suitable. He can listen to him. He can focus. He can do it while he's driving if it's around his schedule. And when I said that's accessibility, you know, and that's, oh, okay, I'm going to try this with my learners. And it was just that penny drop
of recognising that's the gap and what he's doing to bridge it.
But accessibility to what we was taught years ago in a PGC is different, isn't it? Yeah. And it's that realisation that it's given us, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I really like that. It brings, like you said, new opportunities to personalise that experience. And for me, it gives opportunities around that multimodal approach when it comes to, you name it, from planning to a mode of expression for staff, I think, and for learners. So to move it on then, what is the gap? Because the whole session was around the gap. Where are the gaps? Let's point at the gaps and let's talk about them.
Digital poverty, digital poverty, digital parity, and digital literacy, I think, are some umbrellas. Digital poverty, so learners with access to tech and tools. Yeah. And not having access to tech and tools, and having the experience in college but not the experience at home. But also the difference between different institutions and budgetary requirements, and that's something we really have to think about. This isn't something, and I keep banging on about this isn't something as a sector we should be competitive on between different colleges. This is something we have an absolute social responsibility to do as a collaborative and a collective, to pick the right tools to support our learners. So we shouldn't have a digital poverty issue or a digital parity issue if this is going to be something that we take forward. And I get on my hobby horse about this as I go. I'll try and come down a little bit. But then the digital literacy comes to confidence of the staff member to recognise and know how to support the learner. But the digital literacy and the inequity and of the literacy levels of the learners themselves. Some students are really proactive about finding out these tools, but others don't have that. So those are three things I think that advocate the gap, but also we miss some learners. We keep getting focused on accessibility around ND and ALN, but like I said, it's types of learners. But we forget sometimes, what about the learner that's visually impaired? What about the learner that's got hearing limitations?
Yeah,
what about the learner that has multiple complex needs, that's got a physical limitation as well as a neurodivergency? But then we've got to think about making sure when we're doing this, we think about neurotypical learners as well, because just because something's really good for an ND learner, we just go, well, we only use it for an ND learner. Actually, it should be for all our learners. So those are some of the gaps that I think. Do you agree?
Absolutely, Leanne. And there was a lot of discussion, wasn't there, about the use of a tool. So a lot of people are looking online because we haven't got licenses, and the financial side of that is massive. Looking for free tools to use, and they're getting embedded in a tool, but they're only going so far then, and they're not knowing what's suitable. But other people are sharing that practice and saying, this tool can do more than just managing your time. You can actually review your work. Well, I haven't got access to that because I'd have to pay. And the digital poverty comes into it, doesn't it? But I think it's also the aspect of testing the use of a tool and sharing that knowledge. There was a perfect example. There was one person who said they do a lot of transforming text into ebooks for learners. So they're interactive, they've got videos, they've got games, things like this. And they said they use this new tool and it was AI powered. So they thought, oh, this is going to save us ages, because they spent hours creating these ebooks. They said it was more hassle than it was worth. It actually took them twice as long. So that research, that's really important to share with the community so someone else doesn't make the same mistake.
100%.
So they were actually doing a call in the meeting. Does anyone know of amazing ebook tools and what I can do to support this process? So that sharing of knowledge is it going to save time, and is it actually going to support someone within that task or within their need, rather than the selling point of I've Googled tool to support with time management. I click on this AI tool, it does it for me, but I end up managing my time myself. Then that's just cost me twice the amount of work, isn't it?
I think you've hit a really important point there as well, around trying to shoehorn AI into our solutions just because it's an AI thing. And we joke about it a lot. You know, the whole marketing campaign, everyone's trying to sell you protein in your ready meal. It's the same thing, right? And it would be the same thing. Well, this has been done with AI, so it must be good. And then, you know, you're talking about those skills around planning and managing one's time around stuff like Goblin tools and so on. That's great. But also I want those learners in the future to be able to plan and manage their time to a certain degree on their own without Goblin tools. So we need, I think, more sophisticated and complex strategies, linking it to what Leanne was saying as well, around how do we get around using these tools that are excellent. I love Goblin tools, but how do we get around using those in a meaningful way that brings in that human element and those human skills that we have to promote and we have to build upon? And that is genuine open question. I know we were still talking about minding the gap, but I don't know how you see that whole area.
I think one important factor that came out of the meeting, and it was within Charlotte and Emily's presentation, is that they'd actually spoke to a lawyer, because within the IDB process, there's a lot of learner data and a lot of sensitive information on what extent they could use AI. And the lawyer came back and actually said, yeah, you can, but it's got to have human oversight. And I think within all of our use of AI, we forget that, don't we? It's not there to do a task for us completely. We've always got to have our human oversight and knowledge to check it effectively, to still carry those skills and to make sure it's doing right. So as you just said, Tibby, if the learner isn't managing their time at all and they're relying on this tool, how can they effectively check it's working appropriately, isn't it?
Yeah, totally agree.
It's about, and we touched on it in the episode I did with Laura and Charlotte, this is about recognising, it's a bit of a call to awareness as well as a call to action. It's about recognising what barriers we've got to overcome and we've got to overcome. But it's about meaningful change. Picking the tool that helps the job. But doesn't replace the skills that we have to develop. We have to be mindful that time management is a skill. So we have to make sure that people then need to understand the reason to manage time, the consequences of time management, the implications. And this is how you can manage it. This is how you learn to manage it. Then you take away the tool and have they developed the skill alongside. So it's about making sure that you're doing that alongside. For example, I think AI can be really amazing at helping flipped learning, right, in an A-level space. I'll give a quick example, if I may. If you've got a learner who's got to go away and do some homework, right, for, I don't know, humanities subject and write an essay. If that person hasn't understood the session, if they haven't understood all the information, if they haven't accessed, because sometimes the question itself can be really challenging.
Yes.
Have you seen how exam questions are written? And yes, if any exam boards are watching, have you seen how your exam questions are written? But, right?
like that.
And I'll repeat it once more. Have you seen? But if an AI tool can be used to help unpick that question, that learner's gone away feeling a little bit more confident because they might not have wanted to put their hand up in class and show that they didn't know. But they could flip the learning and go away and actually use AI to write the essay. Everyone comes into that lesson. Everyone's used AI to do it, right? The prompt is going to be different. The outcome's going to be different. But you flip the learning. If the tutor spends the time critically engaging, teaching validity, teaching critical thinking, teaching pulling this apart, talking about sources, looking for bias, those are the skills we need everyone to develop. Then you say, now we've challenged all that. Now we've looked for the common thread, the good information. Now we've found the truth in the middle, of what we've got. We've talked about prompting and searching for information. The richness of learning that's gone on is what we want people to be able to do, because we're about preparing everyone for their next stage, work, employment, apprenticeships, HE, whatever. Then they say, right, now write your essay in the lesson. So instead of going home to do it, they've written it in the lesson. We'll talk about why we need to write essays on another podcast, perhaps. But it's about that. So the tool has been there to develop the skill, but we're still checking that they can write and assimilate that information. So it's about turning it into a learning experience, but not replacing the responsibility of developing that skill. Does that make sense?
No, I totally agree. And we're talking about, you alluded there to our current assessment methods, and we know that there are limitations and so on. And just to bring accessibility into that thread as well, because in the advent of generative AI, we all know we're going to need to change the way we check learning, we assess learning. So accessibility, I would say, in the era of generative AI and assessment, will have such an important role to, like you said, break down those processes, or to make that assessment meaningful to the learner, meaningful to progression, you name it. In a past life, I used to teach GCSE maths, and one of my learners who was neurodivergent, part of his issue was understanding the question. Whenever I helped him break down the question, he knew the maths. The maths was easy for him at the time. It was understanding the question and breaking it down into the stages that, again, WJC phrasing, but that WJC phrasing of the question, it was completely confusing him. And never mind, people who don't have English as a first language, hello. For me, the driving test, the theory part of the test was torture. Because I always struggled with the double negatives, triple negatives, it's such a, I would say, a stumbling block to getting where people are at and what they actually know. So, what is that gap pointing at? Just to keep it on, I'm gonna press on with the gap issue there.
I think with that, Tibbs, you've just spoke about such a big challenge, isn't it, with exam styles as well. So we might train our learners to use these tools to support them, and within an assignment, within a classroom environment, they may be getting quite high level grades, and not because they're plagiarising using AI, but because it's effectively supporting them. If they then go into, let's say, a GCSE where you sit in a hall and you've got a piece of paper in front of you, those barriers all of a sudden are there, and maybe are they more prominent now because I haven't addressed these barriers at all, because I've had all these things supporting me. So the support's completely gone, and does that learner then struggle and come out with a bad grade? So I think until we get to that level with those type of assessments or exams change, it's not going to support the learners, is it? So that's a massive gap that we've identified there.
So to close the loop, it kind of brings what you were saying and what I was saying together. We have to use the tool, but still make sure we're developing the skill that they still need.
Yes.
And so it doesn't supplement or replace. It has to complement what we do and enhance what we do. But we always have to remember there's a learner at the middle that's got to complete an assessment or a task. And we've got to make sure that we don't have an over-reliance And that's why the human element is so important when you're checking the usage of these tools and their purpose, and are they adding value, and are they not adding value, and should we use it and shouldn't we? And we'll come on to where I think the community could help do some stuff.
That's exactly
with
where
that
this is
later
leading.
on.
Yeah, it's beyond we're going. What the last question will be around what is community supposed to do, and how are we supposed to help bridge that gap, hopefully. But beyond that, is there anything that surprised you in the meeting? Anything that someone mentioned, or something, a nice takeaway for people listening or watching us now, that you think, this came out as such a lovely surprise that we weren't really expecting?
I think for me, a little bit of a surprise was the simplicity of the tools. So there were a lot of tools there that we commonly use, like transcription and translation is a big thing that AI is supported massively, isn't it?
Yes.
It's quite effective currently in how it translates. But how they can be applied differently to processes to support people. So I think Charlotte and Emily, when they spoke about the IDP process and simply transcribing and summarising information, how much time that saved but supported people in making that information accessible and personalised. And I think a lot of people, when we were discussing this, were going, yes, I use it in this way and I could just use this tool. So not looking for anything more complicated, because sometimes we are guilty, I'm guilty of it, of looking at a tool that's going to solve all of my problems and missing the most simple answer that's in front of me that I've used for years.
So true.
So I think that's a little bit of a surprise. We're all doing a lot of good work. It's just sharing that between ourselves.
I like that.
I agree. And one of the things that stood out for me is sometimes we're expecting our learners to work harder just to stay still and to catch up with their peers. And this is where we have to use accessibility tools, because at the moment the system's geared up for us to just literally do that, allow them to just catch up to stand still with where
I
the
like
rest of their
that,
peers
catching up
are.
to stand still.
Yeah.
And these tools are going to help them to move forward with everybody else.
And learn from our
that's what we need to
learners,
do.
isn't it? I think there's the surprising thing is there's a lot of people who work in education who are blind to how much learners know and use. And we are fighting a battle in a way of our knowledge versus theirs. So why don't we utilise their knowledge and say, OK, what works best for you? What are you using? There's case studies all over the place, isn't there? We've just got to get them to feel comfortable enough to tell us about it. And it's our job then to make sure they're aware of how to protect their work and how to make sure they're secure in what they're doing. And that is a big piece of work, because every tool has different levels of data protection, different terms that are changing all the time. It's a massive challenge. I got to be honest, I don't know how we're going to address. But we've got to trust our learners and learn from them as well.
Love that.
Yeah. And I think we've got a responsibility to also help them when they are using it, to understand how they are using it as well. As in, there's a risk, isn't there? We see sometimes people are getting caught up in a plagiarism trap. They're not plagiarising. They're just using a tool to enhance them, but we haven't supported the guidance and the usage for that. So we're giving them another barrier, actually, because they're like, well, I haven't plagiarised, I haven't copied, I've used this tool. And we've got to make sure when we're using them, we've got to equip and educate the learner properly as well. Otherwise, we're just giving them another problem to overcome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're almost at the end. So this is the question of, so what is our community supposed to do? How are we meant to, when we're highlighting bits of what the gap looks like, what should we do?
So I think what's quite nice is the way we've mapped the next two sessions to really go on a journey together as a community. So everyone that come to this first session, I think, hopefully, got a good understanding of what accessibility is, and that realisation of I'm using this way, or a learner is, and what I need to do now to support them or to grow this process.
Yeah.
So the next session, which Leanne, I know you're looking after, is to try and look at how we can start mending those gaps. So working together to bring everything into one concise area, and how we can share this knowledge effectively. We've got key aspects we need to work on.
Yeah.
What can we do as a community?
And it came out with all the themes and all the things. I think people are really open in this case, in this space, to be collaborative.
Yes.
Because there's a recognition that as legislation has changed, as the complexity of learner need has changed, within an existing system. We've got to collaborate on this. So
Yes.
I think anything that we can do as a community, I do keep coming back to my like TripAdvisor idea because everyone knows what this means. If we can have a repository of tried and tested tools, instead of us repeating the same mistakes over and over, if we all have a place where we can say, I tried Goblin tools, it was great for this type of learner, it didn't work for this type of learner, it worked for this type of subject, didn't work for this type of subject. Even if we did have a star rating, right, for university, I don't know, right? But something that says, and it could work for this. And we did this for everything we use. Instead of us all repeating mistakes and looking at the tools, I think if we had this shared repository, this shared knowledge.
Yeah, it would be a great starting
And then
point.
we come together and go, do you know what? Every college has said that's tried Magic AI or Copilot, has said it's pretty good. As a sector, what can we do around licensing costs or shared lending libraries of resources or each other's training buddies in this space? For that one, and let's as a sector pick that one and run with it for a bit and see if it has an impact. And that's where I think we can make a big difference.
I love that. And I like the TripAdvisor type of thing. I'm a big TripAdvisor fan. Wonderful. It would be lovely to see where this takes us, because I think that type of approach of deeper collaboration beyond sharing ideas, but like you said, the little pros and cons. We've tried this, didn't try that. This worked, didn't work. Just to bring it back to what people are talking about at DigiFest, and I think one of the keynote speakers there was talking about this idea of brilliant failures, and things that you've really given a really good go that didn't really work. I think there's so much to learn from that on this accessibility and AI type of pathway, where we can try things and be proud to highlight what works well and what didn't really work well, where it kind of, took a nosedive. So I'm really looking forward to that. I just want to say thank you so much for taking part in this, and let's do this again soon.
Thank you, Tim.
you.
Thank you.